The Trojan War. The Trojan War is probably one of the most important events that have been narrated in Greek mythology. It was a war that broke out between the Achaeans, the Greeks, and the city of Troy. The best-known narration of this event is the epic poem Iliad, written by Homer. Judgment of Paris. The god of gods organized a grand feast in celebration of Peleus and Thetis' marriage, in which all of the gods and important figures were invited, except the goddess of strife, Eris. The goddess was stopped at the door by Hermes, infuriating her. Before she left, she threw her gift amidst the guests, the apple of discord, a golden apple on which the words, "to the fairest," had been inscribed. Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite started quarreling over who should be the one to take the apple, and demanded that Zeus decide on this matter. Zeus knew that if he made a choice, he would cause the anger of the other two that wouldn't be picked, and decided to abstain. Instead, he appointed Paris, the young prince of Troy, as the judge. Paris could not make a decision, so they started bribing him. Hera said that he would get political power and be the ruler of the continent of Asia. Athena would give him wisdom and great skills in battle, and Aphrodite offered him the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite and returned to Troy. Elopement of Paris and Helen. Meanwhile, the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen, was the daughter of the king of Sparta, and many noble suitors had arrived to claim her hand in marriage. The goddess made a plan and disguised Paris as a diplomatic emissary. He then went to Sparta, where Helen welcomed him, while her husband was away in Crete to bury his uncle. At that point, the god of love, Eros, shoots an arrow at her, thus causing her to fall in love with the Trojan prince. The two lovers eloped and left for Troy. Menelaus returned home and realized what had happened. Along with Odysseus, they went to Troy to get Helen back, but all diplomatic attempts failed. So, Menelaus, helped by his brother Agamemnon, called all Achaean leaders who had previously been the suitors of Helen to fulfill their oath. They also needed the help of Achilles, as they knew of the prophecy that Troy would only fall with his help. Odysseus, Telamonian Ajax, and Phoenix went to Skyros, where they knew Achilles was hidden disguised as a woman. There, they either blew a war horn, on the sound of which Achilles was the only woman that took a spear in hand, or they appeared as merchants selling jewels and weapons, and Achilles was the only woman interested in the latter. Arrival. When the fleet arrived, they were all reluctant to disembark, as a prophecy said that the first Greek to step on Trojan soil would be the first to die in the war. Finally, Odysseus decided to disembark first. However, he threw his shield on the ground and stepped on it, while Protesilaus, who followed him, landed on the ground. Thus it was Protesilaus who died first, during a single combat against the Trojan prince Hector. Achilles campaigns. The Achaeans besieged Troy for 9 years. This part of the war is the least developed among surviving sources, which prefer to talk about events in the last year of the war. After the initial landing, the army was gathered in its entirety again only in the 10th year. Thucydides deduces that this was due to a lack of money. They raided the Trojan allies and spent time farming the Thracian peninsula. Troy was never completely besieged, thus it maintained communications with the interior of Asia Minor. Reinforcements continued to come until the very end. The Achaeans controlled only the entrance to the Dardanelles, and Troy and her allies controlled the shortest point at Abydos and Cestus and communicated with allies in Europe, the Iliad. Achilles, maddened with grief, swore to kill Hector in revenge. He was reconciled with Agamemnon and received Briseis back, untouched by Agamemnon. He received a new set of arms, forged by the god Hephaestus, and returned to the battlefield. He slaughtered many Trojans, and nearly killed Aeneas, who was saved by Poseidon. Achilles fought with the river god Scamander, and a battle of the gods followed. The Trojan army returned to the city, except for Hector, who remained outside the walls because he was tricked by Athena. Achilles killed Hector, and afterward, he dragged Hector's body from his chariot and refused to return the body to the Trojans for burial. The Achaeans then conducted funeral games for Patroclus. Afterward, Priam came to Achilles' tent, guided by Hermes, and asked Achilles to return Hector's body. The armies made a temporary truce to allow the burial of the dead. The Iliad ends with the funeral of Hector. The death of Achilles. Achilles chased the Trojans to their city, which he entered. The gods, seeing that he had killed too many of their children, decided that it was his time to die. He was killed after Paris shot a poisoned arrow that was guided by Apollo. In another version, he was killed by a knife to the back, or heel, by Paris, while marrying Polyxena, daughter of Priam, in the temple of Thymbrian Apollo, the site where he had earlier killed Troilus. Both versions conspicuously deny the killer any sort of valor, saying Achilles remained undefeated on the battlefield. His bones were mingled with those of Patroclus, and funeral games were held. Like Ajax, he is represented as living after his death on the island of Leuc, at the mouth of the Danube River, where he is married to Helen. Trojan horse Odysseus devised a plan to end the war for good. He asked that a wooden horse be built that was hollow inside. Soldiers hid in the interior of the horse, which was brought in front of the city gates, saying that it was a gift from the Greeks, showing the withdrawal of the Greek army and the end of the war. The Trojans happily accepted and brought the horse inside the city. They then started feasting and celebrating the victory. During the night, the Greek soldiers went out of the horse and started slaying the drunk Trojans. In the battle that followed, a huge number of soldiers died, but eventually, Troy fell. The Greeks burned it and raided it, at the same time committing offenses against many gods, by destroying temples and sacred grounds. Although victorious, most heroes and Greek soldiers either never returned home or returned after many adventures, as the gods were infuriated. The Trojan War marked the end of the heroic age of man, according to Hesiodus, and the transition of the world to the Iron Age. Zeus' attempt to depopulate the earth and kill a number of demigods and heroes proved successful.